Hello, everyone. We're so glad you could join us today. Welcome to today's webinar, The Art Museum, Lessons Learned in Turbulent Times, Perspectives from Alums in the Field. My name is Susan Bowen from the Office of Alumni Relations and Development here at Smith. Your participation helps us keep our Smith community strong and connected, and we are especially grateful to our speakers for sharing their thoughts and talents with us today. For our program today, we will start with some introductions, followed by a conversation, and then we will open up Q&A from the audience. And now, without further delay, I would like to introduce my colleague, Jackie DeFelice, Director of International Alumni Relations and Development here at Smith, to get us started.
Thank you, Susan. As Susan said, I'm Jackie DeFelice, and I'm the Director of International Alumni Relations and Development here at Smith College. I want to welcome you all, our audience, as you're coming into this webinar and joining us today from countries all around the world, from Australia to Uzbekistan. And you represent graduates of every decade since the 1950s through to today. We're also joined by students in each of Smith's current undergraduate classes. The diversity of our gathering today speaks volumes, not only about the importance and the interest in this topic, but also about the connections that you have to Smith and that you have to each other. You're part of the vital Smith College network. It's a community you can lean on right now and always. We're honored to have you here with us today. I'd like to acknowledge my colleague and the director of the Smith College Museum of Art, alumna Jessica Nicoll from the class of 1983, who, because of a family medical emergency, is not able to moderate our program today as was planned. Our thoughts are with Jessica and her family. I am, however, very grateful to my colleague Denise Mater, Vice President for Alumni Relations, also an alum, class of 1974, for graciously stepping in at such short notice to moderate our program in Jessica's place. Throughout her life and her career, Denise Mater has had a steadfast focus on developing women leaders, advancing diversity and inclusion, and helping to enhance and grow organizations. I turn now to Denise to introduce our panelists and to lead us in our conversation today. Thank you, Denise.
Thank you, Jackie. And I want to say welcome to the more than 200 alums who are joining us today from around the world. I'm so looking forward to having an illuminating discussion with three extraordinary curators and museum leaders. And I'm so grateful to Thelma Golden, Leanne Sacramone, and Sonnet Stanfill for sharing their experience and wisdom with us today. I'd like to begin this program by acknowledging that I am speaking to you from Nonotuck land, which neighbors the indigenous nations of the Nipmuc and Wampanoag to the east, the Mohegan and Pequot to the south, the Mohican to the west, and the Abenaki to the north. I'd also like to acknowledge and celebrate the presence of Indigenous people here with us today. March 2020 marked the beginning of an unprecedented global pivot. The pandemic, a resurgent movement for social and racial justice, accelerating climate change, the threat of economic collapse, and failures of leadership. Under intense pressure, museums are responding with innovation and optimism, leveraging their power as spaces for creativity, learning, and dialogue for positive social impact. It's a privilege for us to hear firsthand from practitioners who are enacting change through their work in three very different institutions in three separate countries. What will the Museum of the Future be like? Who will it serve? What forms will it take? What needs will it meet? And how? I'd like to introduce each of our panelists now and their institutions, and then we'll move into today's discussion. First, I'd like to introduce Thelma Golden, class of 1987. Thelma is director and chief curator of the Studio Museum, which was founded in 1968 by a diverse group of artists, community activists, and philanthropists. The Studio Museum is internationally known for its catalytic role in promoting the work of artists of African descent. The Studio Museum is preparing to construct a new building at its longtime location on Manhattan's West 125th Street that will enable it to better serve a growing and diverse audience. Thelma was introduced to the Studio Museum while she was a student here at Smith College. She began her career as a Studio Museum intern in 1985, and after graduating from Smith, she joined as a fellow in 1987. In 1988, Thelma joined the Whitney Museum of American Art, where she launched her influential curatorial practice. In 2000, Thelma returned to the Studio Museum as deputy director for exhibitions and programs until 2005, when she became director and chief curator. Under Thelma's leadership, the Studio Museum has gained increased renown as a global leader in the exhibition of contemporary art, a center for innovative education, and I know this to be personally true, a cultural anchor in the Harlem community. Welcome, Thelma.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here.
Next, I'd like to introduce Sonnet Stanfill, class of 1990. Sonnet is senior curator of fashion in the Department of Furniture, Textiles, and Fashion at the Victoria and Albert, the world's leading museum of art, design, and performance. The V&A was founded in 1852 after the Great Exhibition. Originally known as the Museum of Manufacturers, it moved to its present site in 1857 and gained its name in 1899 when Queen Victoria renamed the building in honor of her husband, Prince Albert. For over 2 decades at the V&A, Sonnet's research has focused on 20th and 21st century fashion production and consumption. Her exhibitions include Ossie Clark, New York Fashion Now, and co-curation of ball gowns, British glamour since 1950. Sonnet has curated the major exhibition, The Glamour of Italian Fashion, in 2014, which toured to 4 venues in North America from 2015 to 2017. Sonnet served as a Gilbert Fellow at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, investigating innovative approaches to welcome diverse audiences and staff. Sonnet is a volunteer mentor for the UK-based arts charity, Arts Emergency, and serves as chair of the alumni board for the Coutald Institute of Art. Welcome, Sonnet.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be here.
And third, I'd like to introduce Leanne Sacramone, class of 1989. Leanne is the senior curator at the Fondation Cartier pour l'Art Contemporain in Paris. The Fondation Cartier was founded in 1984 as the first corporate art foundation in France, a country where art sponsorship had never previously come under the private sector. The Fondation Cartier showcases the work of emerging and established contemporary artists, bringing them together with scientists and philosophers who have the freedom to explore many of today's pressing issues. The foundation has as one of its guiding principles never to use an artist to promote the products of the Maison Cartier. Leanne's path into her career began following her studies in French language and literature while here at Smith College. When she moved to France, she discovered her passion for curatorial work as an intern in the Saint-Georges Pompidou in 1995. In 2001, Leanne was appointed senior curator at the Fondation Cartier, where she has notably made known on the French art scene the history of graffiti in Born in the Streets Graffiti, 2009, The Art of the Democratic Republic of the Congo in Butte, Congo, Kitoko in 2016, and the work of Latin American photographers in America Latina 2013. Welcome, Leanne.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to this panel.
Well, I am so excited to be with you. And as Jackie said earlier, I cannot replace Jessica, and we honor her for bringing this together and for curating this event. And I want to add that it's also Jessica's leadership that helps to make the Smith College Art Museum as well, another global leader also dealing with these issues and doing so powerfully and successfully. But to move to today's panelists, who we are so excited to get to and to begin to open up conversation with, as you have heard from these introductions, these Smith alums, who I am so proud of, are representing world-class institutions that are grappling with some of the most important social and environmental issues of our time. So we together collectively acknowledge the three of you, and we are so grateful for this leadership you are providing globally. And with that, I'd like to go to our first question, and I will ask Thelma to be our first respondent, and then we'll move to Sonnet, and then Leanne, if you will, in that order, answer this first question for our audience. The museum field has been rocked by the intersecting crises of the past 2 years. Could you each share an example of how your institution has responded? What is a lesson from this time that your institution is taking into the future? Thelma?
Thank you. Well, again, thanks so much to you, Denise, you, Jacqueline, to the entire Smith community, and to my dear colleague, Jessica, for inviting me to be here with Leanne and Sonnet. It's a real honor and a pleasure. And, you know, what a big and important question. The way I think it perhaps is most interesting for me to answer that question, Denise, is to cite it in the reality that at the Studio Museum in Harlem, we became an institution at a moment very much like the one we're in now, in the late 60s. We were born out of the environment that demanded changes in the world, changes in the museum world, and looked for ways to create more power and autonomy within the Black community, the Harlem community, where I'm so privileged to live and work. And so I think at the Studio Museum, while we have done many of the things that I know my colleagues will say, pivot into understanding the essential way to deliver our mission in the midst of many challenges, perhaps more significant for us, not only because we're building a new building and deeply thinking about the future, but because we are always so interested in holding and understanding the lessons of the past, we have been engaging deeply in thinking about what the past and what history can teach us in this moment, right? So we've been raising not only the voices of artists, but of ideas from the past as it's been defined by the Studio Museum as a way to make sense of and build new pathways to think about and envision our future.
That's great. Thank you so much. Let's move to Sonnet then for your perspective for this first question.
Well, I also am just delighted to be here, and some of the things that Thelma said resonated with me, in particular, kind of looking back at the foundational kind of principle of my institution, the Victoria and Albert Museum, otherwise known as the V&A, which was really to serve as a reference point for manufacturers and artisans to raise the quality of British manufacture across different sectors. And if we go back to that founding principle, that I think is continuing to infuse a lot of what we do every day. But one of the kind of examples of how we're changing our practice is just, I think, exemplified by how we approach curatorial work, which years ago might have been about creating an exhibition or a gallery installation that showed the finest examples of artistic practice, and then telling people what we thought they should know. And I think the pivotal shift that has just simply been accelerated by the last few years is that today visitors should be involved in this conversation from the beginning and should be part of the story. I think visitors to museums don't just want to see the rarefied or the exceptional, they want to see themselves. And that as a curator has been a journey for me in learning how to tell those kinds of inclusive stories. Again, this isn't new to the last few years, but it's a dynamic that I think has been accelerated by the various crises that you mentioned in your introduction.
That's great. Thank you. Leanne, if you would address this question from your perspective.
Yes, thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Well, I'll address it a bit from a different angle. I would say one of the ways we responded to the pandemic was by enriching our online content and experimenting with a variety of new digital projects to accompany our visitors and to deliver messages that have been very important to the Fondation Cartier for many years about the environment, about Indigenous peoples. And for example, in the spring of 2020, in the fall also, during the 2 lockdowns, we launched 2 mini websites on the lives and careers of artists we were presenting in our spaces in those times, and exhibitions that themselves resonated with some of these intersecting crises we are facing. And one of those websites was devoted to the life and career of the Brazilian photographer, Claudian Duzar, who was a Holocaust survivor and spent over 40 years of her career defending the rights of the Yanomami, an indigenous people of the Amazon who have been decimated by epidemics brought in by outsiders and have seen their land destroyed by illegal gold mining. And another online project we developed with this exhibition as well was a soundscape we commissioned from Bernie Krause, a musician and ecologist who had collaborated with us on a previous exhibition called The Great Animal Orchestra. And the soundscape he developed was of the sounds recordings he made of the Amazon in the 1990s. And it's a sound environment that unfortunately is no longer the same today because of massive logging and mining. And then last, in addition to these projects, we also developed a completely new work of art with Sarah Z that was made specifically for a digital environment. And it was an augmented reality application that we developed with her. And it was her first foray into the world of augmented reality. And she considered it a work of art in and of itself. But in any case, I would say that what we also did learn through this experience with all of these digital projects is that nothing can really replace the live experience of seeing an artwork in person. And we had this experience firsthand when we reopened our spaces and people flocked in to see our Damien Hirst show, and really it loved the show, and it became, I think, the 3rd most frequented shows in the history of the Cartier Foundation.
Absolutely incredible. I mean, you're right. There's so many things that we've been able to pivot to, but there's no substitute to being able to come and still enjoy these great works in person. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Leanne. So I'm going to go to question number 2, because we really also want to make time for some live chat questions to come in and to give you a chance to hear from those who are with us today and some of their questions. But from our preparation, question number 2, and I'll start with you and ask you to begin, Sonnet. The past 2 years have encouraged many cultural sector professionals to go back to the drawing board and re-examine what it is they do, and this is my favorite question, and why they do it. So what's your why, Sonnet? Why do you get up in the morning and do what you do?
That's a great question. And I think I can answer that in one word, which is mentoring. I think it's a word that's used a lot. And so I'll just explain what I mean in terms of my work practice. When I think about the key moments that shaped my own career, they were often connected to people who encouraged me, who course corrected me, who served as professional examples. And I think the cultural sector, museums, they offer such rewarding careers, but you just have to look around at who leads and curates within, say, the UK. And it's clear that it's a sector that has not been open to everyone. And so my mentoring work, which you referred to in the beginning, is through a couple of London-based nonprofits. One is through an organization that works mainly with high school students. And I think that's important in the UK because here, the classes you take at the end of high school determine what you study in college. The other organization I mentor with is the academic institution where I did my MA, the Courtauld Institute of Art. And the Courtauld's History of Art programs are one of the chief conduits to jobs in British art institutions like the V&A. And in fact, I think the V&A has more Courtauld graduates than any other institution. So it's a small but very influential university. And as the chair of the alumni board there, I'm vested in working with them to achieve their goal of diversifying their student body. So the mentoring scheme is interconnected with that. And between these two organizations, this mentoring work is really small scale. It's one-to-one with students, but I'm certain that I have learned more from them than they have from me. And I often think about a quote in kind of thinking about why mentoring has been so important for me. I think about Jude Kelly, who's the former director of London's South Bank Centre. And she said, it's not about standing in the middle and saying, I'd like to include you. You have to stand in a different place, and mentoring helps me to do that.
Thank you. That is so incredible. And I won't belabor the time here because we want to hear from Leanne and from Thelma, but mentoring is certainly in the center of what we believe is important and to create some opportunities that will augment our student experience and connect to this very powerful alum body. So you are speaking to my why as well. Let me move to Leanne. Leanne, would you tell us your why?
Sure. Well, I guess there are many things that motivate me to do what I do. I think what's drawn me to this profession is first my love for art and artists and my curiosity and desire to explore new ideas and concepts through their work, and as well as through the work of some of the scientists and thinkers with whom I collaborate. And what I most enjoy is helping artists realize their dream projects. And what I also find really exciting about my work is at the foundation is that we often spotlight untold histories in exhibitions like graffiti or the exhibition on the history of art in the Congo that you mentioned earlier. And last, I guess I'm also proud of the fact that in our own small way, through our programming at the Fondation Cartier, we're contributing to raising public awareness about threats to Indigenous peoples and to our environment. And I'm fortunate enough to work for an institution that has made these questions their priorities.
It's wonderful when there is an open door to telling typically and historically untold stories.
Yes.
Thelma, what's your why?
Yes, well, my why aligns in many ways with both Leanne and Sonnet's, in that, my why, which has been my why since I was a student at Smith College, is artists. I mean, that's why I do this work, and very specifically Black artists. But perhaps another way to think of my why is that, I have been deeply committed through my career to transformation of this field. Institutional transformation and transformation for the ways in which it understands itself. When I left Smith College and entered the museum field, it was one which wasn't very diverse at all. And what it meant to envision a path that not only created a path for me, but imagined a world in which our field could fully embrace a multitude of voices has always been very significant. So in my work as a curator, as well as my work as a museum director, I am deeply interested in the ongoing radical transformation of the field and work towards that every day.
I appreciate that so much. And I don't think Jessica would mind me sharing it. When we had the distinct privilege and opportunity to have an exhibition come from the Studio Museum, unfortunately, it was right at the beginning of our COVID closure. But to know that exhibition had been housed here at Smith College as two alums from a different time, I sat with Jessica and I said, this is world changing. This is Smith College community changing. This is changing the face of how we've thought about art here. And I am thrilled at your leadership to do so, but I want you to be really, really clear what it means to me as a woman of color, as a Black woman, could you have ever imagined when we were students that there would have been this exhibit here on the college? And she had to remember that. So I wanted her to understand the beauty of the time now, but how far, what we've come, and under the current leadership, the investment we've made in art, and to be working alongside you to bring that transformation up front and personally here on the campus. So let me move to the third question. And I'll ask you, Leanne, to answer first, and then we'll go to Thelma, and we'll end with Sonnet. How are your museums adapting and remaining relevant? And how do we reach younger generations? Leanne?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think as a curator, you're always trying to adapt and remain attentive to what's going on in the outside world. And I believe what we try to do at the Cartier Foundation is to explore timely subjects in groundbreaking exhibitions that are conceived and presented in an unconventional and sometimes non-institutional way. And one recent example is our trees exhibition, which we developed as we were thinking about the increasing prevalence of megafires and massive deforestation around the world. And for this show, we brought together the work of artists and scientists to explore the importance of trees in our lives and recent research in rainforest ecology and plant intelligence. And I think one way to reach younger generations is by proposing exhibitions like this that deal with topics that are important to them today. And this is why environmental questions have become increasingly central to our programming at the foundation.
So important, so important. Thank you for that. Thelma, would you address this question as well?
Yes.
How are we remaining relevant?
Yes. Well, at the Studio Museum, the way in which we think about how we're remaining relevant is to, again, claim a lot of our past as a way to engage in current conversations. So for us, what that means is being able to speak very clearly in this moment of institutional transformation about, for example, what equity is and can be in our museum world, but also the way in which we work to remain relevant, and particularly to not only engage younger audiences, but for me personally and for us institutionally, it's important to also talk about those audiences who are not served by our institutions, is by operating always with a true and deep sense of accessibility. And understanding that as the sort of first way for an institution to imagine itself, as opposed to something that comes after everything else we do. And by doing that and creating the possibility that we're not only accessible, but welcoming, that we are creating a way that museums can live in people's lives in ways that are really powerful and extremely profound.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Sonnet.
Yes, I think I would agree with both Thelma and Leanne about the points they made around programming, telling stories within your institution that are relevant, but also thinking about audiences that are not served. And I think one of the ways that the V&A is addressing both of those points is through the building of a new collection center and a new museum, both in the east part of London. You may wonder why, if we've already got a building in London, we're building more. Part of it is to do with building a new collections center in the former Olympic Park to house our collections. The other is a new museum itself that will showcase art and design and aims very much to connect with the local community in East London, in a part of London that is adjacent to some of the highest levels of child poverty in the UK. And so the ambition is for both of those buildings to welcome, yes, of course, that local community, but also hopefully its success will generate interest and enthusiasm from beyond the Stratford area. So I think this kind of ambition to open these two new buildings, which one is in 2024, one is 25. It's been a bit of an improbable project during the last 2 years. where all museums have faced constrained resources. But we're on target. It's definitely happening. And I hope that when both these buildings open, that everyone will come and join us and take a look.
We absolutely will. Congratulations on this project and being on target with your timing to open. I think we have just enough time to ask a fourth question. So I'm coming full circle, and you've touched on this a bit, but I think it would really be, and I would take a special pride to hear as alums, but most importantly, from the time you spent here as students. The fourth question, and going full circle, I'll start and ask Thelma to go first, then to Sonnet, and end with Leanne. How did your time at Smith influence the work you do and how you do it? Thelma, would you begin for us, please?
Certainly.
And then we'll go to our chat after the three of you have responded to this fourth and final question.
Definitely. Yes, my time at Smith really made it possible for me to be who I am. And that's why thank you, Denise, for your comments about Black refractions coming to the Smith College Museum of Art. But when Jessica called me to talk about that possibility, it felt like exactly what I wanted to do, because I imagined what it would have been for me to have seen that exhibition as an art history and African-American studies double major when I was at Smith. And the exhibition is a result of me being an art history and an African-American studies major when I was at Smith. So very broadly, it made it possible. But very specifically, I think who I've become as a curator has been influenced by many people along the way. I have been deeply, I say mentored is sort of the base of it, but I've been deeply supported and incredibly loved professionally, right? There are many people who made me, but a name that I have to say today is Betsy Jones, who was curator at the Smith College Museum of Art. I worked at the Smith College Museum of Art for my entire 4 years at Smith. And Betsy encouraged deeply this idea of my being a curator. I came to Smith with the idea, I knew I wanted to be a contemporary curator. And Betsy, in my work for her, my little after class job, really encouraged every bit of ambition I had to come back home to New York and to be a curator in museums. So I think in so many ways, Smith made it possible for me to do this work. It prepared me in very, very, very important, significant ways. And I will forever and always be grateful for that.
Thank you, Thelma. There's something about having a dream for ourselves, but when someone else can see the greatness in us and nurture that and call that out and help to cultivate it, it's a wonderful thing. So we bless Betsy for the role she played in helping to nurture that seed in you. Thank you. Sonnet, what happened at Smith for you that influences the role you now play at the V&A or your work in the museum field at large?
So I love this question. I'm so happy we have time to address it. I think the significance of Smith is that not only did it shape my education, but it made me aware of gender equity, which has had an absolutely, significant influence on the stories that I've been interested in telling as a fashion historian and curator. Because fashion isn't just about the clothes that we see in magazines or on the catwalk shows. It's really a wider narrative about so much more. And what I like to say in women's college kind of colloquia is that fashion history is really women's history. Because if you think about the range of roles in that industry, seamstresses to designers, clients, buyers, digital entrepreneurs, women across centuries have played a direct role in designing, making, and selling clothes. But I think more nuanced than that is that fashion is also a deep symbol of identity and also an intersectional cultural signifier of class, gender, race, physical ability. And when displayed in a museum, it becomes a powerful tool for reflecting on the human experience. And so when I was at Smith on art history trips to the Met, I remember kind of taking detours downstairs to the Costume Institute to look at its fashion exhibitions. So all of that kind of it was in the mix in terms of launching me into this this career as a fashion curator.
I can only say bravo to that. Bravo, bravo to that. Leanne, tell us about Smith and the connection to who you are today and why you've chosen to do it.
Well, I would say I would definitely not be here today if it weren't for Smith, because Smith gave me the opportunity to come to France on their junior year abroad program. And I fell in love with French culture and French literature. And I ended up coming back here to further study and ended up staying here. So that Smith really gave me that opportunity that has been so important and a determinant factor in my life. And also, I would say, I think the education that Smith provides gives you the critical thinking skills. And as Sonnet was saying, makes you very conscious of the importance of gender equity. That gives you also the confidence to pursue your career as a woman in general.
Well, we are delighted to know, and I can certainly share in that experience as an alumna as well. I'm not just the Vice President of Alumni Relations. I, too, studied here, and everyone under the sound of my voice can share in some way, connecting the stories of our lives of today to our start here at the college. And they may all look very different, but I think the enabling power that we take to know that we have a voice and that we have not only the right, but the responsibility to use it in the world is a huge gift. And it's something that the college to this day continues to nurture, which is one of the reasons I've chosen to come back and step into this role. So I am so thrilled for what you've shared. And I'm grateful that I have also moderated us to have a few extra minutes to make sure that we can get to the questions from our audience. There are many, many listeners. There are many, many alums from around the world. This program has really knit us together as a global community. So the offer and the opportunity today, even in this gathering space, is once again opening up a forum for us to connect as a community internationally. And that's huge. So it's not every day of the week that we can all come together and connect virtually, but here we are. And so I'm going to pivot back to Jackie, who she and Rania have been navigating the chat. And there are questions that have come in. And for the next 15 minutes or so, we'd like to offer those to you and invite your comments in real time. Jackie?
Yeah, well, thank you, all of you. I wish you could be observing the chat, because there is so much Smith pride going on right now. I'm an adopted Smithy. I'm feeling so much pride right now. Everybody is so grateful for this amazing panel. And I've been trying to curate some of the questions that came in with the registration, and also questions that are coming in through the Q&A. And I can say that you've actually answered a lot of them in your comments thus far. People are very interested to hear about how your Smith experience has brought you to this place, which you just described. And I think kind of a follow-up to that question is, people would love to hear from you how they, as getting out of school, how they can break into the museum field. Any advice you have for them about breaking into the field? And Sonnet, you kind of touched on it with mentoring, and but I'm wondering if the three of you might just give any little nuggets of gold that you have for our listeners today.
So who'd like to start? How about Sonnet? Would you start with that question?
Okay, I think I would cite the Smith College community as a great place to start. I think actually I have to give some credit to Thelma, because when I was graduating from Smith and doing my MA, I think Thelma connected me to someone at the Costume Institute for some volunteering experience one summer. So the Smith College community is a wonderful place to start. And I think that not only do experiences of volunteering and work experience, those are important, but increasingly kind of education. When I started out, I could just about get a job with an MA, but I'm not sure if I were starting out again, I might need a PhD along the line, but that's not required to kind of break in initially. So I think that those kind of weekend and kind of after hours jobs that Thelma mentioned, you know, when you're at Smith, when you're doing your BA, try to layer on as much experience volunteering or doing kind of paid Saturday work as possible. The other thing I would say is publish early. I wish someone would have told me that when I was at Smith, to try to anything, a book review in a academic journal, or, you know, any kind of exhibition review, because it all accumulates into a kind of list of published work. I'll stop now.
No, that's really awesome, because we have such important initiatives here at the college to improve writing and to help students see that platform to use writing as part of their discourse, as part of their activism. So great advice about that. Who else would like to answer the question? Maybe Thelma, would you take a crack at how best to break into this field?
Yes, certainly. So I'll follow up on what Sonnet said, because what I am always thrilled and feel very privileged that I hear from Smith students and Smith alums all the time, have been thrilled to have many, many, many Smith interns, many Smith employees at the Studio Museum. But what I would say most specifically is that, yes, the Alumni Network is an incredible resource. But what I would encourage is people being at once specific, but also broad. I find often that people will reach out specifically about a job. And I think where the network can be more effective is helping you get to who you might need to get to, or help you shape how you might form the relationships that you need to get to what you want to do. So I always encourage, you know, I'm always open for informational interviews, but even have a checklist, demand a certain set of answers first, so that I can be specifically helpful and impactful beyond what might be the most immediate desire, which isn't always possible. The other thing I would say is that, you know, as someone who's working, you know, in New York, you know, Sonnet's in London, Leanne is in Paris, you know, these are big art capitals, but I really also encourage people to think about how they might pursue this interest wherever they are. And that sometimes means looking outside of the formal museum structure, you know, so that when someone comes to me and says, I really would love to be a contemporary art curator, I am so interested in what that means. And maybe they're not somewhere where there's a contemporary art museum, but perhaps there's a university with an MFA program. And I say, well, clearly there are curatorial opportunities within that, but they don't look the same, you know, and so I really do also encourage thinking you know, in ways that are broader than perhaps what might be seen as just that I'm going to go to Paris and become a curator, or go to London, or go to New York to be in a museum.
I love that. And I have branded, and we have branded now, calling our network the network at work. And so put it to good use, put it to creative use. And one of the things that we do so well collectively is to think creatively and think out of the box. So I love your encouragement to students or early alums, recent graduates, to think about just connecting with another alum, to think about how to think about what it is that they want to do. It doesn't have to be well-shaped and well-formed. I know there are other questions, but Leanne, do you want to weigh in on this one, or shall we? About how to break in. I think it's an important question that everyone would like to hear from each of you who have a thought.
I think Sonnet and Thelma really answered the question, said everything that I would have said about, you know, how to pursue a career in the arts. So.
Okay, that's great. Then let's hear another question, Jackie, from the chat.
Yeah, so I want to be clear that this webinar is being recorded and it will be shared on the Smith YouTube channel. So I know there's a lot of great information, and there's also a lot of people who have, you know, wanted to join us today but couldn't. So we'll be getting this material out there in the days after the webinar. So another question that has, and we've touched on this in the conversation, that virtual exhibits seem to have had the potential to reach broader audiences and increase access. And people would like to hear, has this actually been the case in practice? So has this been the case in practice? And then a follow-up to that, how important is it for visitors to experience physical objects in a museum? Big question.
Who would like to start?
Well, I guess I could start maybe because that was what I was talking about at the beginning.
Absolutely.
Yes, I would say that the virtual experience does allow you to reach sometimes an audience that would not normally be able to come see a show, but it definitely has its limits. With our experience with Sarah Z, her installation, it was something that was extremely hard to film. And the experience seeing it on film is very different than the experience when you experience it in real life, because it's something that envelops you. She includes you in the space. And so again, I would say it can really, these digital tools are amazing to be able to touch an audience that's not nearby, but they have their limits, and it's good to be able to come and see the show in real life. There's nothing to replace that. I hope that answers the question.
No, I think it certainly does. There's no one answer. I think that's one of the reasons that we're so fortunate to have the Smith College Museum here on campus, right? For students and alums and others, even from the community, who get to visit it. We are very, very fortunate to bring a piece of what's going on in the larger world right here to our own campus community. And there is no substitute.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think any of us would ever imagine proposing that there was, but I think what we have learned, particularly over these last 2 years, is that the digital experience isn't necessarily its best to replicate what would be the physical experience, the in-museum experience. It's an experience of its own. And at the Studio Museum, this has been real for us because we've been closed since 2018 because we are building a new building that is rising on 125th Street as we speak, designed for us by the architect Sir David Adjaye. It's our first kind of purpose-built museum in the museum's over 50-year history. So that when we closed in 2018, we already were thinking about what it meant to create other kinds of experiences under the heading of our life as a museum. And then, of course, the pandemic made that even more the case. So I think that really the pivot to digital, yes, it does expand audience and it does expand experience. It's just a different experience. It's not one to replace the experience of works of art in public, but it is one that can expand the experience around art and ideas.
Thank you for that. I think that's been our experience. I mean, this is what we're able to do today, right? Because of the digital space, we're able to reach alums in countries and time zones that we ordinarily would not. And so we're going to go forward with an appreciation for a hybrid experience, right? Sonnet, is there more that you would say to that, or have we answered this question in a different one?
I would just add one thing, which is that digital experiences don't necessarily have to be exhibitions. You know, as a curator who's now, I don't have access to our collections in our storehouse because they're being packed to move. And so part of that move involves photographing and making digitally accessible on our website every single object, all 250,000 objects in the V&A's collections. And given our founding purpose, which I mentioned as a reference collection to, inspire designers and improve manufacture, having those images on our website makes it possible for people to at least understand the general aspects of an object. They can still, when we reopen our storehouse, come and see them in person through appointment. That's a big part of what we do. But similarly to Thelma's experience of the building being closed, our collection is closed. And so the digital tools, accessible through our website are enabling us to do our jobs.
And it sounds like increase your audience, because people who have not had the experience before now have an experience through digital media could cultivate, a desire or an interest that they really didn't even fully know or know how to navigate. So I think we're all experiencing increased audience participation through the virtual digital space. We could probably take another question if you have one, Jackie.
Yeah. So lots of great questions coming in. I think we have either a number of parents of young children or teachers in the audience, because the question has come up a few times about any approaches that your institutions are taking towards engaging children and youth. So very specific question there about children and youth and the engagement. So
I might just kick off with just another kind of mention of a project that's quite sizable, which is that we are in the process of reopening our branch, another branch institution formerly known as the Bethnal Green Museum of Childhood, now being rebranded as Young V&A, which is aiming to engage with a kind of younger, chronologically younger, but also young at heart audience in East London. And so it's not that that's the only place you can go within the V&A family for young people, but it's targeting specifically that demographic. I'm sadly not a part of that exciting project, but I think it promises to be very compelling.
That's great. Anyone else? Young audiences.
Yes, well, at the Studio Museum, we are deeply committed to, how we can engage young audiences in our Harlem community and beyond in art and art making and art experiences. So our programs, both those that are created and exist in partnership with schools and those that are created in out of school time, working with many of our community partners that work with children and youth and with families, are all to, again, create the opportunity for art and art engagement for young people. But we also have a particular interest in teens and creating a space for teens in the Uptown community to see art and creativity as a way to express themselves, to engage with history and identity and culture. So those programs exist, again, as a central place in our mission, where the museum can live and be a community partner, a real sort of civic anchor in creating, real opportunity around art through education and through engagement.
Thank you, Thelma.
That's wonderful.
At the Fondation Cartier, we organize artist ateliers every week in conjunction with our exhibitions. And so we ask artists to develop specific projects that will work with a group of 10 to 15 young people to do an art project. And that's a very exciting program we have at the foundation. And otherwise, we have family tours that we organize for families with children to come and see exhibits. And we work closely with schools as well to develop tours specifically for students who come to the foundation with their teachers.
Fantastic. Yeah. It's a kind of a thorny question to ask, but a couple of people have asked it, or a few people have asked it. How are you able to obtain funding for your projects during the pandemic? That's a big question. I don't know if anyone wants to think of that.
Well, I can answer that pretty quickly because the Fondation Cartier is entirely financed by Cartier. And so we are lucky enough to not have to worry too much about financing as long as Cartier is doing well. So during the pandemic, we were able to continue to develop a certain number of projects. And even though we couldn't show them in our spaces for the moment, but we didn't have to cut down on staff at all. And then we had also assistance from the government as well in France. So there weren't too many problems on our side.
So the Fondation Cartier is in a unique position in that regard.
Yes, I think we are.
So wonderful. Thelma,
Yes, I mean, we were very grateful to our longtime donors, and our funding at the Studio Museum is a combination of funds from the City of New York, funds from foundations and corporations, and funds from individuals. And, you know, in all cases, we were grateful that there was an understanding and commitment for us to be able to continue to do our work, to pivot into the ways that we needed to do our work, that made it possible for us to continue fundraising and being able to support the museum, our activities, our programs, and our staff.
Wonderful. Okay,
That is wonderful.
yes.
Sonnet, do you want to weigh in, or?
Yeah, I think there's not much to say that's different from Thelma and Leanne's comments regarding their institutions, only to say that the landscape in the UK involved the government being extremely generous in terms of supporting particularly large national institutions, and the V&A is a national UK museum. So we were, most staff was furloughed at full pay. And that, I know, is an unusual scenario. So we're all very grateful for that. And, you know, we're back in business, reopened, and welcoming visitors again. So the largesse of the British government is to thank for helping us to continue.
Well, thank you to all of you for answering those questions so beautifully. There is one final question from some of our current students who are viewing the webinar today, and they would like to know if they can reach out to the three of you for career advice in the future.
Of course.
Yes.
We will certainly find a way to help broker that. So I'm sure if our panelists are open, and they said that they are, then we will, in alumni relations and certainly through the Career Center, work to help make those connections. I think we are at time, and I just simply want to thank each of you, and for those alums who are under the sound of my voice, for first of all being an incredible community holding the space, but very specifically to our three panelists. You are doing amazing work in the world and in all of the huge things that you are tackling and the ways and your approaches for doing so. Thank you for taking this time to join our Smith community and help us to stay real and relevant and connected to the wonderful work that you're doing and some of your personal perspectives and approaches. I'm so appreciative, and I know I speak for everyone. Thank you for loving Smith enough to spend your time with us today, and to everyone under the sound of my voice. We're grateful that you've come together, because together we are one Smith. So thank you. And Jackie, if you'll close us out completely, it will be great.
Yeah. And once again, thank you, Denise, for stepping in last minute and doing such a fantastic job of moderating this conversation this morning or this afternoon. And thank you again to our panelists, and thank you to the behind the scenes team who have made this webinar possible. Thank you all. You know who you are. So thank you again, panelists, Denise, everybody, audience from all around the world, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.